Hi. Welcome to the first episode of the Driving Podcast. This is Lenny, aka Tribrix, and today's episode is called Suicidal Bond. So, just to give you an idea, lately I've been listening to two albums, Shabu Shaba by INXS and The Swing by INXS, and the reason will be clear if it's not clear already from the title of this episode. And I was just recently watching Fargo and listening to the commentary by the director of photography. Interesting fact, Prince was not in Fargo despite the appearance of his symbol in the credits. It was, in fact, I think the film's editor who played that role, although it may have been one of the writers, but I think it was the editor. Anyway, a little trivia fact for you there. So, right now, Showtime is showing this docudrama that was released earlier this year in Australia. It is called INXS, Never Tear Us Apart, and it is a documentary style drama, you could say, depicting the band INXS from their forming in the mid-70s until the death of their first lead singer, Michael Hutchence, in November of 1977. And so I'll talk a little bit about how I first discovered INXS and why I think that I have been watching this docudrama so obsessively. I think I've seen it all the way through about 5 times now in the last 2 weeks, and then obviously I've been listening to the music as well. Anyway, so let's go all the way back to 1984, and my father asked if I wanted to accompany him to his boss's house to pick up some papers. And normally you might say, well, why would I want to go to my dad's boss's house? Except my dad's boss had a very beautiful daughter, whom, for the purpose of this story, we're going to call Lisa, although that's not her real name. And so we went over to Lisa's house. And as soon as we arrived, she said, hey, do you want to listen to some music? I'm like, sure. I mean, she knew I was a music fan, like a big music fan. And she pulls out this tape, and it was The Swing by INXS. And she said, do you know this band? And I said, no, I've never heard of them. And she goes, listen to it. I think it's really good. So she puts it on her boombox, and I think it was queued up to the first song, Original Sin, and I really liked it. And she said, do you like it? After a few songs had played, and I was like, yeah. And then she says, do you want me to make you a copy? And like, this is kind of strange because, you know, Lisa and I had moved to town around the same time, and hence being new in town, we hadn't made any friends yet, really. So our fathers had colluded for us to have a meetup in the summer before school started. Again, we just moved to town. We didn't know each other very well. And, you know, at first I was kind of trepidatious about this meeting, thinking like, you know, is this girl so unappealing that she needs her dad to arrange get-togethers with guys? But obviously I was quite wrong because she was very appealing. And so anyway, so we had that meeting before school began, and then school began that fall, and I believe that was the fall of '83, and we had a lot of classes together because we were both in the college track. This was in Stillwater, Oklahoma, so in addition to the normal college track and the shop track and the jocks, you know, there was also a lot of people at our school in the 4-H club who were very agriculturally inclined. I mean, Stillwater is surrounded by farmland, so you can imagine there's a lot of farmers. And but as I say, we were on the college track, so Lisa and I had a lot of classes together. And despite having that early first meeting before school started, we had not become friends. We were acquaintances, we were friendly, but we were not friends. And the whole point of this is her offer to make me a copy of INXS The Swing seemed kind of strange at the time. Like, why is she being so nice? And the only thing I can conclude since then, having thought about it a little bit lately, is that she really wanted to promote the band, that she really liked this band. And, knowing that I was such a music fan, had lots of friends who were music fans, that if she made me a copy, maybe I would talk it up with my friends and increase INXS's popularity. And I was very appreciative of the copy she made me. The next time I was at the record store, I picked up a copy of Shabu Shaba by INXS, meaning then I had 2 of their records to listen to on tape. And that was all the INXS I ever owned, really. I've never bought any of their other albums, but I like those 2 albums so much. Subsequent to getting the cassettes, I purchased them on vinyl and then again later on CD. So these were records I really liked, even if I didn't call myself a big INXS fan, as they later in the mid and late 80s became much more famous, much bigger. Their sound turned into more of a kind of pop music sound than what I was liking at the time, and or at least that was my feeling about it. So I was not into their later stuff as much. And so now in the story, we're going to skip forward to 1997. 1984, now we skip forward to 1997. And I had just come off of this really, really messy breakup with a girl that you can imagine I really liked, since I'm calling this a messy breakup. And so anyway, I'm coming off of this breakup and starting to, go out more and things. And I decided to try this bar in my neighborhood called Vintage. And Vintage would later become like my hangout. I was there almost every night for a beer or 2. Knew everybody's name, they knew my name. I would stop there on the way home from work, have a drink or 2, sometimes more, but usually not. And anyway, Vintage became my hangout, but the first night I went there, it was on a Saturday. And I went up to the bar and got a seat, and next to me was a very attractive young woman who seemed to be about my age. I later learned she was a couple years older than me, in her early 30s. And she was easy to talk to. We had a pleasant conversation. Soon the guy sitting next to her also joined our conversation. So the 3 of us were talking, and we wound up closing the bar and going back to his place. And they may have partaken in some substances of questionable legality, although I did not partake in those. And we were having a good time. The guy was really cool. He actually was a record executive, and as best I can tell, this girl, who we're going to call Wendy for the purpose of this story, Wendy was a professional groupie. Now, I'm not just saying that out of nowhere, but she didn't have a job. She lived with her parents. She was in her early 30s. She was really into the music scene, and when I say really into the music scene, she was friendly with lots of bands, and really knew how to party. I thought I could party, but that girl could put me to shame. So anyway, we're hanging at this guy's place. We'll call him Bob. We're hanging at Bob's place, and Bob has thousands of vinyl records on the wall, and he's a music executive, so we naturally turn to music. And after we started talking about music, Wendy started talking about INXS, and it was nice to talk about INXS, but she was obsessed. Like, we couldn't change topics and talk about other bands because she just wanted to talk about INXS. And it was clearly her favorite band, but I think it was beyond her favorite band. I think it was something she couldn't stop thinking about. Which was interesting because in 1997, INXS, to me anyway, seemed like they were on the downswing of their career. And, it was, I guess because of Wendy's age, I was thinking, maybe they were her band at a very special time. Although now I think, maybe she once slept with Michael Hutchence and, it just made the hugest impression on her. I don't know. Just speculation based on information I've learned in recent times from watching the INXS docudrama so many times. So anyway, Wendy is obsessed with INXS. Can't stop thinking about INXS. So, and I hang with them as long as I can. Since I'm not partaking of the substances of questionable legality, I faded a lot earlier than they did, and I wound up taking off. And Vintage and Bob's apartment and my apartment, they're all in the same neighborhood, in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan at the time. And so I just walked home. And interestingly enough, I got Bob's phone number because, he's a record executive. And I thought that might be useful later. And he and I wound up, being in contact for many years after that. I did not get Wendy's phone number because, I was not in a band and therefore did not think that she would be interested in me in any way. And I didn't really want to call and talk about INXS some more. So I didn't get her phone number. Now, that was in the early part of 1997. Flash forward to November 22nd, 1997. And I remember the day because it's the day that Michael Hutchence killed himself. His body was discovered in the hotel in Sydney, Australia. So I'm not in my neighborhood this time. I'm down in the East Village, and I'd heard the news that Michael Hutchence had died, and I was thinking in my head, like, wow, I wonder how poor Wendy's taking that. She must be devastated. And walking around the East Village, just kind of seeing what's happening. And who do I bump into? Of course, you've already figured it out. Wendy. I bump into Wendy for the second time. I've only ever met her twice in my entire life. The first time, of course, I told you about, and the second time on the day that Michael Hutchence killed himself. And of course, she was in a state, like, she was so upset. And, just kind of inconsolable in a way. In fact, I don't know why she was out, except that I can imagine if you're in your early 30s and you live with your parents, you probably just get out as much as you can, especially at night. And so she, like me, had just been wandering around, and based on the fact that I knew she was upset and our first meeting, I kind of like exchanged pleasantries, and then I was going to be on my way, and she was like, no, hang with me, So we wound up like hanging out the rest of the evening until I really was tired and had to go home, as like our previous get together. And again, I didn't get her phone number. I assumed that our paths would probably cross again at some point, since they had already crossed twice randomly. And in New York City, that's kind of what happens sometimes. But our paths never crossed again. And But the point of this story is to say that, although I was not the hugest INXS fan, Michael Hutchence' death really was moving for me because I was with Wendy on the day that it happened. And I kind of feel like that's part of why I've watched this docudrama so many times in recent days. I never knew Michael Hutchence. I wasn't even that big a fan, but his death was definitely more moving to me than Kurt Cobain's death a few years earlier. And so I guess that's where that part of the story ends. The thing about Michael Hutchence' suicide, though, at the time, there was a lot of speculation that it might have been like a autoerotic asphyxiation and an accidental death. The coroner, and it seems like the evidence suggests that it really was suicide. And, that's kind of sad when you think about his daughter and, at the time, girlfriend Paula Dean, who herself would pass away very soon thereafter. And it's also strange for me because two of the closest people in my life also committed suicide. But in both cases, at the time it happened, we were estranged from each other. And so I didn't hear about it until months or years after the fact. And I have to say, not hearing that kind of news at the time that it happens creates a kind of a sense of denial for me, in a way. It's almost like there's a part of my brain where I can't accept that these two friends of mine are gone. So I'll give you a little bit of details. When I was adolescent, going to summer camp, the last year I went to summer camp in North Carolina, my counselor was this guy who was my favorite among all the counselors, and I'd never had him as a counselor before, and I was so excited to. And since I was finally in his cabin, we actually had a chance to become friends, and more than the acquaintances we'd been before that. And we became really good friends. After camp ended, we remained pen pals for years. And then sometime in the mid-'80s, his letters stopped coming. And I always assumed that his letters stopped coming because we were both moving a lot at that time, and we had just missed each other by then, which is something that has happened to me in the pre-internet days in the past. My father was in the military, and we moved a lot, and there were times you would just, somehow miss somebody. You had moved, they had moved, and neither of you had a current address anymore, and you were no longer in contact. So that's what I assumed happened. But in fact, I learned that it was around that time that he took his life. And I just, having been in contact with him at that, I can't imagine what circumstances would lead him to take his life, of all people. He was so full of life. There's no other way to put it. And he brought so much joy to so many people. I was not the only person at camp for whom he was their favorite adult, a huge portion of the people who attended the camp, he was their favorite person there. So that was just absolutely bizarre to hear about. The other friend of mine was one of my best friends from high school. Now, I went to 3 different high schools, so I had best friends at each one. This was one of my best friends, and we had become estranged about 5 years after graduation in '91, and I'd been searching for her ever since. But she's one of these people who, she liked to be off the grid even back then, and so I wasn't surprised that she was hard to find. But around 2008, with the rise of Facebook, I realized that I might finally have a chance to find her, not necessarily because she would be on Facebook, because she never would, but maybe somebody who she had kept in contact with. And then it dawned on me, I'd been trying the wrong way all these years. Instead of looking for her, I should have been looking for her sisters, because they're both much more social and connected than she is. And sure enough, within minutes of coming up with this idea, I was emailing with her older sister and inquiring if my friend had an email and how I might get in touch with her. And my friend's older sister wrote me back right away, and she said, let's not discuss this by email. Here's my phone number. Give me a call tonight. And as soon as she said that, I knew it's got to be bad news. And so anyway, I wound up calling her, and it was really nice to speak to her again. I mean, I'd known both sisters and met them socially on their own sometimes. So it wasn't just that I was a friend of my friend. I also felt connected to her family. In fact, her parents are the only parents that have ever chewed me out like parents do, except for my own parents. That's how close I was with this family, and I took it as if I was their son that they don't have, But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. So I'm talking to the older sister, and she explains to me that my friend had become sick. She had developed schizophrenia, and that the events of 9/11 had exacerbated it. She was living on Capitol Hill at the time, and had been evacuated, and was, like schizophrenic people do, was taking this way too personally and assuming it was directed at her, and it caused her marriage to fall apart, and basically her whole kind of psyche and life that she had built just came crumbling down. And she went to move back in with her mom, and she and her mom had a very strained relationship, so I'm sure that wasn't the most comfortable thing for her to do. And so she had been living with her mom. She did not like taking her anti-schizophrenic meds, and was on and off of them, and I guess it just got too difficult at some point, and a few months earlier she had taken her own life. And not only am I still in denial about the loss of my friends, at the time I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I always imagined her and I friends in old age. In high school, I used to imagine us as old people hanging out, having conversations similar to the ones that we had in high school. We were never romantically involved, and this was part of the reason that I thought that we would always be friends, Our estrangement in 91 had come about because of a girlfriend of mine at the time being jealous of this relationship and wanting me not to continue it. And because I was young and stupid, I sided with my girlfriend instead of my real friend. And I am no longer with the girlfriend, and now my real friend is dead. Go figure. So anyway, my friend took her life, and it was only a few months after I found her sister. And for so long, I felt really guilty about this. Like, if I had thought of looking for her sister sooner, I would have gotten in touch with her. And maybe this connection with something really good from her past when she was healthy and sane would have made a difference, and maybe she wouldn't have taken her own life. And I felt this way for many years. And, part of me has to wonder if it isn't the case. But then last year, at a birthday party that I was attending, I was talking to one of the other dads who I was very friendly with, and he was telling me the story of one of his friends from high school who had developed schizophrenia and dropped off the grid and was like living in a halfway house somewhere. And one of their mutual friends had said, hey, so-and-so is like living in a halfway house. I'm going to go see him, and see if there's anything I can do to help him. And the other friends in the group were all like, oh my God, that's great. Let us know if there's anything we can do. And so this mutual friend of theirs had gone to the halfway house to visit the schizophrenic friend, and they didn't hang out at the halfway house. They wound up, like walking around the neighborhood there, and the friend from high school reported back saying that he had a really hard time talking to their old friend, that the disease had made it really hard for him to engage in any kind of a normal conversation. But, and this is the interesting thing to me, or the thing that makes me kind of feel less guilty about missing my friend before she killed herself, was that as they were walking around and he was talking to the homeless people there, he and them seemed to get along famously. There was no awkwardness. The conversations flowed. And the mutual high school friend reported that, I think our friend has really gone somewhere where we can't communicate with him anymore. And so I wonder and speculate that maybe my friend had gone somewhere where I wouldn't have been able to communicate with her anymore. And for me, that would have been sadder in a way than just having the memories that I have and the fact that she's no longer with us. But, I'll never know. We'll never know why Michael Hutchence took his life. I'll never know why my counselor took his life. And I'll never know why my friend took her life. But it's the pilot episode of my driving podcast. I hope it hasn't been too much of a downer. Thank you for listening and watching, and I will catch you next time. Bye.